Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to our tonight's HORIZONTE Blockchain Summit in cooperation with the Vienna University of Economics and Business. My name is Herwig Neuper. I am project manager at the Innovation Department of Wirtschaft Austria, Advantage Austria, here at the Federal Economic Chamber. Despite the harsh weather conditions and the train strike, we are having a full house tonight. To those who, because of security reasons, did not get into the Julius Raab Hall, please be patient, stay with us, and follow the broadcast of the discussion in the Hall 6 and 7, and join us afterwards in the foyer of the chamber with the speakers and the other participants. Welcome also to our worldwide followers via live stream. I'm promising you won't get bored tonight. We're expecting an exciting evening with hopefully very interesting insights from our experts and inspiring discussions. Okay, let's start the event. Therefore, I would like to ask the Director General of Wirtschaft Austria, Advantage Austria, on stage for his opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Michael Otter.
Well, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome also from my side to tonight's HORIZONTE Blockchain Summit. The topics are blockchain, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, but also the convergence of all these technologies. What does it mean for us as entrepreneurs? As a small and medium-sized companies, how can I integrate these use cases? How can I integrate these technologies into my business model? What can I do with it? But another question is, how can we as public institutions, or how can universities support our entrepreneurs, support our startups and entrepreneurs to deal with these technologies? And in my opinion, what we can do is we can give guidance, we can give impulses, we can give ideas, meaning we can try to translate these developments, we can try to translate these technologies so that our entrepreneurs can grab the idea and then can use them and integrate this into the business model. And imagine the following, just to give you an idea of what I mean. An Austrian entrepreneur, he stands in the middle of this room, and all around him, you, are the brightest minds of all over the world. Entrepreneurs, startups, scientists, visionaries. And our Austrian entrepreneur in the middle of the room, he can now ask questions. He can ask the questions which are important to him. What does this blockchain mean? He's asking in the middle of the room. What does it mean for me? What is the blockchain for my business model? Or maybe to the Israeli entrepreneur. Did you use already KI? What does it mean? How did you integrate it in your business model? And our Austrian entrepreneur in the middle of this room, he gets the answers. He gets the answers from the people who are relevant to him, meaning he gets the relevant answers. And what you're picturing now, so this entrepreneur standing there asking questions to these international minds, is our vision. And it's the network we as the Advantage Austria tried to build for you. What we did over the last 2 to 3 years, we advanced our business model from export promotion agency. So we leveraged our 100 offices all over the world to support you to ask and to connect, to ask the right questions and to connect to the right people and minds all over the world. So we reinforced our business model. We connected the Austrian companies to these brands, and we developed programs. We developed more than 100 programs, meaning workshops, innovation trips to all over the world, to Stanford, to MIT, to China, to MIT, to support and to help the Austrian companies to connect, if you may say so, to these international, to these bright minds all over the world, always to help you to improve your business model. The event we're organizing today is part of this initiative. And I'm very grateful that we found the Vienna University of Economics and Business as our partner, because I think partnerships in these developments are the most important part of our work. I very much welcome and I'm very much looking forward also to our keynote speaker, Rumman Chowdhury, from Accenture Applied Intelligence, if I'm not mistaken. BBC called her one of the most influential people of the world, I think last year, 2017. So very much looking forward and a warm welcome also from my side. I'm also looking forward to the panel discussions organized after or moderated by Dr. Shermin Voshmgir. She leads the Research Institute for Kryptoeconomics at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And the people you collected to discuss these topics in all the different facets. And I'm also looking forward to the workshops we're organizing tomorrow. So we have a couple of people who really want to have a deep dive. We're organizing some workshops on these topics tomorrow in this house for about 50 Austrian companies. Enough spoken, welcome from my side, and I would like to lead or give the word to Dr. Shermin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm very honored to be here and happy that we're collaborating this evening. We were invited by the Außenwirtschaftskammer to curate, as the Kryptoeconomics Institute, an evening regarding blockchain, another blockchain summit. And why did we choose this topic? Because blockchain is such an interdisciplinary technology, and it's not standalone. Apart from being interdisciplinary, the technology itself interacts with other emerging technologies like big data, the Internet of Things. And if we don't understand what this interaction of these technologies is, we won't understand the use cases, and we won't understand the social, political, ethical questions that are tied to this. I'm very happy that beginning of this year, we got some funding from the Austrian Ministry of Economics and Research to start this institute. Jeffrey Owens, one of our co-researchers, will be here tonight too on the panel. Blockchain is a fundamental shift in how we organize our data structures in the back end of the internet. This is also why people refer to blockchain as the cutting-edge technology that leads us to this next-generation internet. Some refer to it as the Web3. And it's changing our data structures, which has the advantage that we can have more ownership and control, especially about not only our private data, but also more transparency along the supply chain of goods and services. On the other hand, blockchain is a governance machine. The auto-enforceable code, the protocol, and the smart contracts can be used as a governance tool that is transparent based on these peer-to-peer data structures. And it can resolve a lot of governance questions that we have today using the internet. And the third game changer is probably tokens as the killer application of smart contracts. It has become very easy with a few lines of code and just a few minutes of coding to create your own token. Now the question of what I write into the token, what are the properties of that token, are unclear. What type of tokens do we have, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, we have many unresolved questions, and all these questions are very interdisciplinary. The topic today, and why we chose it, is smart contracts are very powerful auto-enforceable tools, but the data that comes into that smart contract comes from outside. It comes from some kind of software, from some kind of big data tool, or from some kind of hardware. And then it's auto-enforced. So I'm very excited to introduce our first keynote speaker to talk about the intersection of blockchain and AI, show us a few use cases, but also talk about what we can learn from what went wrong in the Web 2 and all the things that we need to maybe beware of creating this next generation internet. I would like to welcome Rumman Chowdhury on stage and to introduce this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this event. So my name is Dr. Rumman Chowdhury, and I'm the global lead for responsible AI at Accenture. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is how we can learn from the mistakes of AI to create a better blockchain. So first, this is the most important thing for everyone here to take away in this room. If artificial intelligence is the brain, then blockchain, distributed ledger systems, is the spine. Now, what does that mean? So artificial intelligence, as we may understand, is a system of creating engineering or computer programs, in a sense, that are able to create knowledge or grasp information around the world around it without direct linear programming. In other words, what I do is I give it a set of concepts, and using that, it understands and impacts the world. So we move from a world of thinking back from our data to a world of prediction and acting on those predictions. So as we've seen, as I'm going to talk about today, there have been some ethical issues that come up as a result of artificial intelligence taking action that's reflective of biased data and biased inputs, as well as poor governance that have been built into AI systems. And I'm going to trace the history in the AI world of where that comes from and how that's impacted the world and how we are where we are today. But it's quite critical. When we think about AI as the brain, if it's thinking in a sense, well, what is blockchain enabling you to do? It's actually enabling you to take action. So the way that your human brain would be useless without the spine to sort of distribute that information throughout the body, your central nervous system, that's exactly how AI and blockchain can operate. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and blockchain being used in smart supply chains, as well as some very immediate use cases to create digital identities using biometric information. So we use this artificial intelligence to gain really interesting insights. We use the blockchain to be able to transparently action on them. So as Shermin had mentioned, we're in a state of constant transition. So we have these three versions of the web. And just to explain what it is, Web 1.0, as Sir Tim Berners-Lee put it, was sort of the read-only web. Read-only just means we have we take the physical manifestations of what we have and we sort of stick it on a digital, a digital interface. So you imagine all of the stores you go to physically. Well, instead you just take the pictures of everything you have in the stores and you put it on the internet. And now I'm able to kind of browse or shop and see that. But it's a very linear manifestation of the physical onto the digital. Now Web 2.0, which we're sort of in, here-ish, is the read-write. So why do I say here-ish? Because we're still very tied to our physical way of building things. So most online retailers still are technically Web 1.0, where they have their physical goods and they just put them on the web and then you buy them and then they ship them to you. So it's actually a very closed way of thinking about things. You can think of things like YouTube as being more Web 2.0, where we generate the content that lives there, and there are people who actually monetize on that content. So the concept of social media influencers is a very Web 2.0 concept, right? This would not exist in Web 1.0, where average citizens, average people have this presence and they're actually influencing and contributing to that narrative, a global narrative about the web. And in Web 3.0, which we hope to arrive in with the help of blockchain, is this read, write, execute. So now we're able to take more advanced actions that are web-based. So moving into Web 3.0 is only enabled through this combination of artificial intelligence and blockchain. Here's where we use AI to our advantage to take actions possibly on our behalf, and then using this concept of maybe smart contracts or a distributed system, fully transparent systems, to be executing code, taking actions as our agents living on the web. And this is a concept I think to many is not only foreign, but actually just a little bit frightening, and understandably so. Just this concept of an entire digital world that exists independent of our physical world. So this is not like having an avatar that lives online. It's as if this avatar lives in a totally different planet. And that's not a web that we have today, and that's the web that we hope to enable with this combination of AI and blockchain. So the symbiosis of AI and blockchain. So I'm just going to talk about three examples. One is the concept of supply chain. So why is this so important? So the way the supply chain, most supply chains work today, this is just large-scale shipping, right? So if I need to ship products or furniture or something from China to the US or to Europe, how does it get here? How do we trace all the pathways? And traditionally, it's actually very, very obscured. We're not sure where a product is at a particular point in time necessarily. It's not very traceable. So what blockchain is able to give you is the concept of that traceability. And this has actually been quite valuable in finding things like human trafficking, labor violations, and actually a lot of other legal violations, because we have individuals who are responsible at every point in the supply chain. We are actually able to track that in a way that we were not able to before. So where does artificial intelligence come in? And here's where we start moving into this Web 3.0, right? So imagine you are a supplier and you create white T-shirts for H&M. What if H&M, then the two of you combined, have an algorithm that predicts the number of white T-shirts that will be sold on a daily basis, and it is produced according to that and shipped out to you accordingly, completely automatically, right? So being fed the data from the H&M registers on the number of white T-shirts that are being sold, creating a predictive model based on historical data, and then having that production and shipping automatically happen and completely transparently happen, and also happen real time. That starts to move into Web 3.0, right? Because all of those actions can actually happen independent of human action. So an individual doesn't have to say, yes, buy, no, don't buy. We can enable a human, and there are plenty of cases to be made, an argument to be made for why you might want to have a human-enabled system. There's a lot of talk of human-centric AI, but it's very interesting to think that one might be able to actually create an entirely automated system for this sort of need in AI and supply chain. Second, when we think about medical services, so as we move to electronic medical records, the decentralization actually helps in safety and security. So instead of it being housed in some sort of a centralized system, we are able to transparently see who's accessing our information, and we have to enable that access very, very simply, right? And also the fact that these would live on completely decentralized nodes would mean that individuals or hackers will not be able to get into our information and be able to use it for nefarious means. Also, those individuals who may be concerned about government, et cetera, it enables human beings to have the sense of ownership over our data. So in the AI space, currently, there is a massive debate and discussion about how we can enable people to have more power over the decisions that are made for them. What blockchain starts to enable is the individual empowerment and ownership of our data and our personal information, so that it's not housed in some third-party system, so that when I give consent, I can take away consent just as easily. Because today in the world that we live in, when we give consent to use our data, we are essentially giving it to use in perpetuity. In other words, companies hoard our data and our information, and we're not quite sure what they will use it for. And in fact, they don't always know what they will use it for. All they will say is, I would like to use your information, yes or no. And by and large, we say yes. And then they have this information. And seemingly innocuous data, like maybe the number of steps that your watch picks up every day, today may seem like useless information, maybe even helpful information, because it can help you guide your fitness goals, right? Tomorrow may be used to determine whether or not you have coverage on insurance if you live in the US or not in a place where you are provided socialized health care, or the quality of care that you are given, or worse, whether or not you're able to get a job that's maybe more physically taxing, because they will determine that you're probably not physically fit. So what have we given consent to? And when can we take this consent back? This sort of power over our information and data can be better enabled by the use of blockchain. Similarly, we can use algorithms to help us identify diseases early on, because we are then more comfortable with sharing our information with doctors, medical professionals, and practitioners, because we are safe and secure knowing that we can take that back if we need to. And quite critical here, and you'll see a common theme, is this concept of trust. We will not adopt systems, we as in a world as a whole, the average citizen, the average company, will not adopt these systems if we do not enable trust. Finally, thinking about biometric identities. So we have biometric identifications, in other words, retinal scans, fingerprint scans, combined with a blockchain system to enable people to get in touch with their personal documentation. This is actually being used for refugee populations. So the company I work at, Accenture, Microsoft, and some other people have combined to make this project called ID 2020. What ID 2020 does is it exactly that, biometric identification. Well, we also have the World Food Program using it to distribute funds in order to be able to buy goods for refugees. Otherwise, we had, if you give people physical cards, you certainly can't give people money, because what happens is you can have theft, people taking each other's cards. So if we actually tie it to an individual's identity, again, more safety, security, and importantly, trust in the system. So artificial intelligence is a leading indicator. What can we learn from the space I work? And so I work in AI and ethics. And we are actually the forward indicator for the other emerging technologies, particularly blockchain and quantum. So what can we learn from what my space is today? So this is a map that talks about how we've evolved AI, our concept of how we think about AI and humanity. And I laugh a little bit because this is pretty much the trajectory of Silicon Valley. So I live in San Francisco, and this is by and large how we see all of the major companies talking about the need to take responsibility for their actions, for ethical behavior, right? So it starts off with this concept, this naivete. What harm could it possibly cause, right? All I am doing is X. All I am doing is building a search engine. All I am doing is building a media platform. How harmful could it be, right? As we move into solutionism, people start to think, oh, well, I can fix all the problems. I have all the data. I can do anything, right? So then people are starting to encroach into spaces. In the US, we saw this happen, particularly after the last election. Suddenly, everybody cares. Everybody's in all the spaces. And it is a little bit of the move fast and break things mantra happens to us in this do-gooder space as well. The third is this denial. And frankly, most of Silicon Valley is still here. This concept that technology is neutral, that data is neutral, or that data represents some objective good or some objective place where we need to reach, so we optimize towards the data. And one thing you will often hear is, well, the data said so. Why are all of our personal assistants women's voices? Oh, because by and large, what the data shows us is that people like women's voices in positions of helpfulness and servitude. But is that a good thing? Okay, you're right, the data does say that. But what the data then says is we live in an unequal society, and we probably shouldn't perpetuate that. But the problem is most people are stuck in this, the technology is neutral. Some people have evolved to this space to say, okay, yeah, we have a problem. Our technology is not neutral. Our data does reflect an unequal society, and what we fear is scaling and perpetuating those inequalities in a manner that is invisible, because algorithms don't have physical properties. You can't see one if it's operating in the background, and we may not even have choice or consent over whether or not an algorithm is being used to make a decision in our lives. Very, very similar to this narrative you're going to hear about blockchain, right? When you have agreed to a particular token or a smart contract, et cetera, what is happening in the background? How is it impacting your life? And then what next? What do we do with that? Even for those of us who live in the space of we have a problem, who are actually ahead of the curve, we haven't entirely sorted out what to do with that information. And if you follow the AI and ethics space, we're struggling with this concept of global governance. We're struggling with the concept of data privacy and security. What are norms around concepts of fairness, accountability, transparency, explainability? And we're going to be talking about that on the panel later today as well. So I'm going to use Facebook as an example. So this was an article from back in May, and as I mentioned, this article's headline is back in April, and this article's headline was really, really well done. So it says, Facebook cannot remain a benevolent dictatorship. This concept that these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, right, who've created companies around concepts of media, or actually Facebook, which was created to help college kids find other good-looking college kids, was not created with this noble cause. These are not people who understand the social implications of their work. And when we follow their trajectory, and actually just last week, and I bring this up because just 2 weeks ago it was revealed that Facebook had allegedly been, not allegedly, they had hired a public relations firm that had been using questionable tactics. Then this concept, so this article is from back in April, and yet we still have this discussion happening as of 2 weeks ago. So I'm just going to follow Facebook's trajectory here. And these are, except for the last one, pretty much direct quotes taken from the history of Facebook. So starting off with this naivete, give people the power, right? Decentralization, what could possibly go wrong? And this is the economic equivalent of believing that the Adam Smith's invisible hand can just make markets move perfectly, right? So this idea of like, oh, you just give people the power and everything will be, will be wonderful because it will just all sort out net, right? So the second, solutionism, move fast and break things, the famous motto of Facebook, right? So get out of my way, I'm solving problems, and just it's okay if there's collateral damage because we are actually net doing good for the world. Who's decided what good is? Who decides how good is measured? And who decides that the end game is good and that their priorities are the best? Well, they have, right? Benevolent dictatorship. Third, particularly again, after the 2016 election in the United States, this concept that they kept pushing, that they're just a social media platform. How could they possibly be blamed for the polarization of Americans, for Russian trolls, for misinformation and disinformation and the spread of literal lies or the spread of propaganda? Well, we're just a social media platform, right? This is the same narrative. This is not just to blame Twitter. This is a common refrain we hear. Sorry, it's not just to blame Facebook. Common thing we hear Twitter say as well for a very long time. We're just a social media platform. Why are you blaming us? We're just a distributor. Well, yes, but your algorithms in the background are actually creating that polarization that happens. And then finally, just as of last week, essentially they came to their help moment. So last week, Mark Zuckerberg writes this very long, I think it was about 4,000-word article, and it's been about a blueprint for content, governance, and enforcement. Now, getting here was a very painful decade, possibly. It has been, for those people who have been following the concepts of data privacy, security, whether you're thinking about algorithmic bias, the spread of information, there are people that have been following this space and asking for help and asking for governance at Facebook for over 10 years. And just last week, we finally get this, where they're saying things like, well, okay, we're going to create an independent governance body, which, I'm curious to see how all of these things work out, right? So we're going to create content governance. We're going to actually not allow for certain types of content to be shown. We're going to make it a transparent system. This all took a very, very long, this is a very hard-won battle. So let's dissect, right? So when we think about the 9 things that are listed, this is straight from Mark Zuckerberg's post. These are the things that they will now prioritize. Number 1 is community standards. Now, it's very interesting to think about communities because whose community and who's setting these standards is sort of this assumption here that we have one unified norm of standards, and I can tell you as somebody working in the AI and ethics space, we do not. It not only varies from community to community within a nation, it most certainly varies a lot from place to place around the world. Second is proactively identifying harmful content. So this very directly comes because of the negative influence they had in Myanmar. So they were warned, they were actually literally begged by the people in Myanmar as they had increasing political polarization on Facebook Messenger by active users who were trying to polarize people against religious minorities, completely ignored the problem, and now there's genocide, there's massive amounts of political strife, right? So thinking about proactively identifying harmful content, but again, what is harmful, there's this interesting gray area where I'm curious to see how they are identifying and flagging harmful content and harmful by whose standards. Discouraging borderline content, giving people control and allowing more content. And again, these are nice sounding words, but what does it mean to give people control? algorithmic bias, which is something that they should be doing anyway. But I want to focus more on the last four. An appeals process, independent governance and oversight, transparency and enabling research, and working together on regulation. Now, particularly these four are something that the blockchain community can learn from and start working on today. So what do all these mean? Well, we were very naively in the algorithmic bias space in a world of policing, where we're just going around and we're pointing fingers at different companies saying, you do this bad and you do that bad and you do. It is an exhausting place to be in. What we actually need is not just transparency, but agency, the ability for people to take action. So a fully transparent system can also be a fully biased system. And if we think about systems of power and the structures of systems and power, those at the bottom are simply the recipient of said transparent system with no ability to take any action. So what is the purpose of transparency if we do not have an appeals process, an objective way for people to actually take power, right, into their own hands? Independent governance and oversight. So one of the most common things a lot of companies are trying to do today, thinking about AI and ethics, is create an external review board of researchers, ethics experts to advise them. And it's very interesting to think of, and actually one of the things I do at Accenture is help companies create this external review board. So I sit in partnership on AI, and I'm on the Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency group. And our project is actually to take this, I suppose, this protocol out of the University of Washington Tech Policy Lab called Diverse Voices, and it's training on how to engage with community stakeholders. Because it is one thing to create this independent ethical review board, it is another thing to engage with them in a meaningful way, instead of having them sort of as a shield to say, oh no, clearly we're ethical because we have those people sitting over there who advise us on how to be ethical. Just because you create the body doesn't mean you actually know how to interact with them. Thinking about transparency and enabling research. So again, back to this concept of transparency. Transparency is useless without number 6, without agency. And then working together on regulation. So the important thing here, and this is another thing for the blockchain community to draw from, is that this is an evolving space. We do not know what this is supposed to look like. What has been very unique about artificial intelligence, which is also very unique about blockchain, is we're moving into an increasingly globalized world. But we are an increasingly globalized world with very, very different legal laws, norms, and standards. So when we create regulation around, let's say, content moderation, in other words, stopping offensive or bad media from going onto social media platforms, it may mean pornography in the US, but it may mean stifling dissenting opinions against the government in China. So when I create norms around content moderation, standards or regulation, what am I exactly talking about? So when we work together on regulation, we actually need to enable a global narrative, which blockchain too needs to start thinking about today, rather than thinking about it from a, I suppose, a very decentralized perspective. So in contrast, I wanted to point out an example we had with Amazon that, and you've probably heard this, they supposedly killed an AI recruitment system because it could not stop the tool from discriminating against women. So why do I point this out as actually a good example? So this is an example of good governance, of a system gone right, about safe innovation. So what happened with the Amazon system? So they wanted to create a natural language processing-based hiring and recruitment system. Great. So they took all the resumes that of all the people they've hired and not hired over the past N number of years, put it into an NLP-based system. What they want to do is draw the top 5%, right, from all the resumes that they get. Like any other major company, they're inundated with so many resumes, and they know actually that hiring is probably a very biased system. It's inconsistent. It's very subjective. It's quite difficult. And every company, Accenture included, we are struggling with this. And artificial intelligence holds this promise of giving us this objective way of weeding through these resumes, bringing out the best of the best, right? However, even though you have perfect data and you have a great model, we have an imperfect past, because we do discriminate against women in hiring. And overwhelmingly, no matter what they did, if there was any way to identify that it was female, in other words, even if you said you'd gone to a women's school or participated in a women's soccer league, it would automatically remove your resume. Okay, so why is this a good example? Well, number one, they knew to innovate safely. In other words, they didn't build an AI and just put it out there in the world. Nobody lost a job or nobody was not hired for a job because of this algorithm. This was totally built in a test environment. Number two, they actually knew how to identify and try to fix bias. That's actually that's better than most companies are today. Most companies do not know what kind of bias they are looking for. They do not know how to identify, and they do not know how to fix it. And then number three, and this is kind of the most important one when we think about bias, whether you're developing a protocol, whether you're developing an artificial intelligence system, they were okay with letting it go. It is very, very rare that a company spends years, literally years, on a project and then decides, oh, actually, because of a social imperative, gender equality, we're going to not use this system. Because, by the way, they could have ignored it and had massive gains in efficiencies, right? Because it would have clearly been a more efficient system than they have today. It just would have been efficient and very, very biased. So this is why I use this as an example of a success story, taking the advice and doing it well. So let's think for a minute about governance, as I sort of highlighted Amazon's AI and recruitment as an example of good governance. So governance is about privacy, right? So let's think about GDPR for a second, as everybody in this room is impacted by it. The number one, the right to be forgotten. So how does this link to blockchain and AI? So it's interesting, if you have a fully transparent system, and what if you are linked via transaction? What if you want to have the right to be forgotten, but your being forgotten is actually disruptive to a fully transparent system? How do we understand, how do we embrace that? So a very, very strict interpretation might be that throwing away your encryption keys is not acceptable as erasure of data. So what does it mean to erase your data from a seemingly immutable ledger? And second is when we think about regulators. So recently, the UK Financial Conduct Authority finds, quote, significant challenges in a discussion paper when thinking about blockchain being used in the financial sector. And it's because there's ambiguity around these terms. And what's needed very urgently in this space, same thing as needed in my space as well, in AI and ethics, is some clarity around what these terms mean when it applies to blockchain protocols and technologies. And privacy is absolutely paramount here. And it's not just because of GDPR. It is key to trust. And again, I'm just going to keep going back to this narrative of trust. If we cannot build trust into systems, nobody will adopt them. We cannot just build systems without the rest of the world in agreement with what we are building. So this is really interesting, and people often don't realize this, but good governance is about creative dissent. It's actually not about enabling a world in which everyone just blindly agrees. It's actually enabling a world in which people feel safe to explore. And this is why I used Amazon as an example of good governance, because it allowed for a safe innovation. So good governance enables free thought in a safe manner. So actions that stifle the rights and freedoms of others are not, because we don't want a world of automatons. And isn't that ultimately the spirit of decentralization of technology? It's to allow individuals to freely explore, freely create, and freely navigate their own world. So how do we respect that culture while also ensuring a culture of good behavior? And I use the word culture very specifically because I don't just mean laws. Laws are not just meant to enforce. Laws are actually meant to create norms in society, right? Because we cannot just go around the world constantly policing everybody and every action that we take, because what we do then is we create a world in which people do not feel safe to be creative. And then finally, when we think about governance models, back to this concept of agency, addressing and redressing problems. Governance models have to think about additional transparency in systems and enabling deliberative democracy. What is deliberative democracy? It's what we're seeing in Silicon Valley today. It's the core of the Google walkout. It's the core of engineers at Google quitting because of Project Maven or Project Dragonfly. It is people feeling like they deserve a voice, even if they sit at the bottom. They deserve a voice that finds its way upwards and influences the outcome. Governments around the world, particularly functioning democracies, spent a very, very long time creating systems that are supposed to enable deliberative democracy. Our vote is supposed to matter. So how can we then go into companies that create systems where we have no voice, but we're actually expected to contribute to the development of that technology. And that, I think, is what Silicon Valley and the AI community is chafing against, that we are being told to create things that reshape the order and structure of the world, but we do not get a voice to say that that is ethical and that is unethical. So what is it, how can we, and what does it mean to ensure address and redress within these governance systems? So good governance is actually about enabling creative dissent. I cannot emphasize that more. I think there's increasingly a misunderstanding of what governance means, and not just within the community, but also what does it mean to create artificial intelligence or blockchain-enabled AI, right, to create a safer world. And what is the difference between having a safe world and a constantly surveilled world? Because we actually do not want to live in the constantly surveilled world. We want to live in the worlds in which we're able to freely go outside and feel safe and secure. We do not want to live in the world in which we know we're safe and secure because there's a drone on every corner watching our every behavior. So thank you very much. I think we are moving straight into the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rumman, for these opening words. I would ask all other panelists to join us on stage. Jeffrey, Tom, and Sebnem, please.
Did your leg fall asleep?
Wow. Very strong opening words. Thank you very much for that. I fully agree, and, well, we had coordinated this. We live in very interesting times, possibly at the advent of this next generation internet. And it's still early on in the game, and we have the possibility to learn from so many things that went wrong in the last 2 generations of the internet. And we will talk more about these topics a bit later. Before we start to deep dive into the more social, political, ethical questions that are very important, I would like to start a question and answers round, deep diving into potential use cases that show how blockchain interacts with IoT, big data, AI, real-life use cases, so you can see what products we might have in the future. And I would like to start with Tom Fürstner. Or actually, I would like to start by introducing everyone. Tom Fürstner is the founder and CTO of Riddle & Code, an Austrian-based company that works on the intersection of IoT and blockchain in the first place, focusing on physical identity. You will tell us more about that. And he has a strong background on the intersection of software, hardware, arts, and economics. And among many other things, he was also a professor at the University of Applied Arts here in Vienna. And for many years now, he's been working on the intersection of blockchain and IoT, and we'll learn more about that. Next up, Sebnem Rusitschka. We met a few years ago. She also has quite a diverse background. Working in the research lab at Siemens, and you will talk more about this in distributed system on the intersection of not blockchain, but machine learning and IoT. And then you moved into creating your own company on the intersection of blockchain, AI, and IoT, focusing on peer-to-peer energy. Since beginning of this year, you've been involved in a company called Africa Green Tech, so we'll hear more about that. Very interesting use case. And we have very hyperactive people here on stage. You're also leading the working group at the Bundesverband Blockchain in Germany, leading the energy working group. Yes. Next up, Jeffrey Owens, Professor Jeffrey Owens, who's also one of our co-researchers at our Research Institute for Cryptoeconomics. He's also the head of the Global Tax Law Department at the Vienna University of Economics. He has a very active background in international tax regulation, especially with the OECD. And he looks at digitalization, blockchain, AI, Internet of Things, and what it means from a legal tax law perspective. So anything we create needs to be implemented and regulated. If it doesn't comply with regulation, it's probably not a use case.
Why it's not very popular in the blockchain community.
Yes, but this is why it's very important to have you on board. Last but not least, Rumman, very happy to have you here too. So, Tom, I'd like to start with a question. Could you start by explaining some of the use cases, the technology that you're building? What is it, and what are the hands-on use cases that would make sense to business?
I hope you can hear me. Welcome. So, okay, Riddle & Code is a company. It's quite young, so it's only 1.5 years old. We are, meanwhile, 23 persons. We have approximately, we are running or operating 18 projects right now with international customers, quite big ones like Deutsche Telekom or the French luxury industry or the Swiss banking industry. What we do is quite unusual still for the blockchain landscape because we build hardware and we build very specific hardware. So I have some samples of the things we do. And we built this hardware around very, very small chips. And you have to consider these small chips practically blockchain computers. So all this goes back to a very simple idea. It's incredible what you can do with a blockchain or a public ledger or distributed ledger. And everything you can do is only possible with digital data. So our thinking was, what could we achieve or what would be possible for the world if we could do the same things with physical assets or physical things? Now, if you want to put something into a blockchain, you have to hash it. And as a matter of fact, you cannot hash physical things, yes, which is quite tricky. So the epiphany was quite simple then. So we thought, okay, if we cannot bring physical things into the blockchain, let's bring the blockchain to the physical object. And this is exactly what we did. So we were building, designing, thinking about new processors. We were scouting the market for specific chips. And we tried to find the smallest chips possible. And we found them in the banking industry. So these are the chips you normally have in your credit cards or smart cards. So they are programmed in a totally different way. They are connected to industrial bus systems, and they have connected different antennas. And what we do now is we connect these chips to physical objects, and we give them a so-called identity by connecting them to so-called Bitcoin addresses. And this enables us to ask them mathematical questions. Yes, so every everyday object is capable suddenly to talk to us. Yes, so I can take my phone and ask an object like a watch, please watch, tell me, are you a real, true Rolex? Yes, and the watch can say, yes, I'm a real Rolex. I was produced in Switzerland in 1984. I was bought or sold in Dubai, and I was resold 2 times. So this sets up a complete new business model, and we are following through with this business model with several companies in a very versatile field of projects.
Including China at the moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Could you explain 2 use cases a little bit more in depth? So that was a very good general introduction, but 2 tangible use cases maybe involving supply chain.
Yes, so supply chain.
Maybe,
yes,
not necessarily.
Supply chain is an excellent example because, for example, we have a project and we think it's a typical Austrian one. So Austria is a very fortunate country. Yeah, we have a fantastic landscape, we have great food, we have fantastic agriculture and so on. And we think there are some real precious things which are underrated on international markets. So, for example, the Bundesforste, yes, you know them. The Bundesforste are producing incredibly interesting products, for example, wild animals, right? And every autumn they have to be shot, so they have to balance the ecological, how can I say, the ecology has to keep the right balance.
In the forest,
so,
the Bundesforste
yes.
in English is the national forest.
National forests of Austria, exactly. And so, for example, when they shoot a wild pig, they sell the kilogram for approximately 5 to 6 euro. So exactly the same piece of meat could achieve on another market in Europe, like UK or let's say Brussels or Paris. Yes, let's take UK. 150 to 240 pounds, right? So you have to imagine this is a real huge gap, and it happens because there is some asymmetry in information, there is not enough logistics, and so on. So if you now start to use this kind of tags, and you start to tag every kilogram of meat, yes, you can do smart things like, okay, I turn this into a token economy. Yes, I already sell to the British market the beef 1 or 2 years in advance through a so-called utility or service coin. Yes, then you have an influx of virtual currency or digital tokens into the local economy, which is empowered to better manage, maintain, and go forward with this kind of economy. And every time you deliver this, you have first created a new value, you have created a new economy, and it's super transparent because all the information concerning the meat, concerning the location, concerning the supply chain, concerning the temperature chain, yeah, is also stored on these small tags, which now are money, a technical medium for information, which are an economy amplifier, and many things more.
Yep. So the intersection of, you told me in a previous conversation that there are tags as small as a piece of a sticker that where you can measure temperature and have a mini computer on it.
Yes, so this is one of these examples. I will hand it around, and you have to pass it around because the true chip is 2 by 2 millimeter. Yes, if I take away the casing, which is out of plastic, it's only 1.07 millimeter. So it's super small. But the exciting thing is this chip consists of a so-called crypto accelerator. I know it sounds very metaphysical. It's not. It's just a mathematical engine. Yes, and a radio transponder and a microcontroller. So the microcontroller inside of this board costs around 40 euro cent. It is as powerful as the Apple Newton or the Palm handheld device was 10 years ago. Yes, with one difference, yes, the price. So you use it once and then you throw it away. But still there's so much power. And it takes so less power that you can operate it 24/7, yes, either by harvesting free frequencies or by using solar cells, yes, because it only takes about 50, maybe 60 microampere. That's really nothing, yes. So you can imagine that these chips, which can do all these interesting things I tried to describe, yes, can be every square meter in a city, and then they can measure the data of everything. And then suddenly we have these interesting questions we will also face today. Yes, who is allowed to write data? Who is allowed to read data? Who is going to regulate this? Who is allowed to monetize this? Yes, who is allowed to put them there and take them away? So we have incredible, powerful technology, which is very, very unusual because every object connected to this technology becomes a wallet. Yes, a virtual currency wallet, and therefore is digitally addressable, traceable, and controllable. And we have to find the right regulation, the right policies, and governance structures to handle this. And there's no doubt about this, a fantastic chance for doing new business models.
Yes. Thank you very much for these explanations. We'll get into a few more use cases in the next round and the challenges around the use cases. Sebnem, can you talk about, I'm not quite sure which part, will it be Africa Green Tech? Can you explain a use case that is suitable for a general audience with a diverse background to understand the intersection of these technologies?
So actually there's only one domain that I really feel comfortable and really confident in, that's energy. Because I've been in there since 2008, since the beginning of Smart Grid, which I really learned with Siemens and their customers, while I'm just a computer scientist. Well, basically, we know that our systems, our energy systems, are becoming more and more decentralized, with renewables more and more volatile, meaning this decentralized system needs to be kept in balance. And we know it's going to become more digitalized, more automated, and also that anything we do in the future will need this electrical infrastructure to be very efficient. So everything what Tom said actually plays right into our future or now energy systems. But how does it start? It can be very incremental that we say we can use blockchain and smart contracts in the energy system just for coordinating the multiple stakeholders in the energy systems. Like the big suppliers of energy, the retailers who sell it to the end users themselves, and the grid operator. All of them need to coordinate on one resource, and that's not electricity, but the data about electricity supply and usage. That's it. But they have so many processes that they have to keep in balance. Now, with a blockchain infrastructure, they can focus on the businesses and this information exchange and have actually the decentralized blockchain infrastructure take care of keeping the data consistent, keeping the state information consistent across all parties. So that would help us to get a more efficient energy system by enabling, for example, one-click supplier change. How would that happen? I would click on my app, I want to change my supplier, and my smart meter would actually be able to trigger a smart contract that enables my contract moving from this electricity supplier to the other, just by telling them it's me who wants to change and the kilowatt hour time-stamped. That's it. And probably the smallest one could do it, right? Yeah. So that's one thing, but it's incremental. If I wanted to do that, I would have stayed with Siemens, and it would be fine. But what Tom mentioned, this token economies that become possible because now we have the potential to capture value digitally. That is a game changer. And to explore that, to do applied research on that, I really had to go out there and build my own company and really also embrace the new potential of building a company in a decentralized manner where you can coordinate by allowing others to participate in your value creation. So one such example that is on the very other side of the spectrum, and there's a lot in between, but the other side is the Sun protocol. That's a project that we just started in February in 2018. And it's about blockchain enabling a solar container. It's a solar smart grid with 45 kilowatt peak PV panels, storage, and the grid that you roll out to supply electricity to 4,000 people in off-grid areas. You literally ship that container to where there is nothing, and the people there get electricity, broadband, satellite, internet, access to information, and also now a financial infrastructure. And the amazing thing really is, I hope I can explain that, not be too geeky about it. The amazing thing really is we can use this blockchain infrastructure to automate everything from the financing of the infrastructure to doing the contracting with the operators in off-grid areas, to incentivizing everyone involved to optimally operate and optimally use the infrastructure. And then also, it's just by itself, to do the accounting, billing, and payment of it. Now, that would be great, right? Perfectly open source or accountable system. But then something crazy happens. Now you have an infrastructure powered by zero-cost electricity, zero-cost energy, where you tokenize the energy going into these economies, into these villages, and you at the same time capture the value that the people create when they get access to electricity.
So it's redefining value creation.
Totally.
Yes.
And
so,
since, and since there is nothing to disrupt, you actually get a feel of the creative power of disruption. So,
I mean, for those of you who have maybe not thought or heard of the token economy and what you can do with tokens, this is science fiction or maybe too abstract when you hear or think of it the first time. Maybe because I know what you guys are doing, can I sum it up a little bit? So this Sun Protocol is a company that was called Africa Green Tech before and has been producing solar containers. Autonomous solar containers and shipped them to different African countries and started some field tests. And so on one hand you have, or you're tokenizing the funding, you're creating a security token to fund this the system and the investment side of it. On your roadmap, your plan is to, once the solar container is in that country or in that village powering 40 families, create this new internal economy and find a way to incentivize value creation, capturing the energy flow into the different economic activities. Now, how to do this is still an open question. Yeah. And we are maybe thinking of doing a joint research project because it has become easy to create a token, but what the governance and the monetary policy and where you incentivize value creation, that's an open question. We can create tokens that are maybe, how do you want to create that token? When do you incentivize somebody with a CO2 token or with a Sun Protocol token? When they produce energy or when they use energy for something useful? And how do you measure if something is useful? And when the people are rewarded with that token, is that token based, bound to their identity? Or is it a fungible token that they can trade? And even if they can trade it, can they trade it indefinitely? Or does it have an expiry date? These are just a few questions. And you don't know yet, am I correct? How you want
actually, it's a very interdisciplinary field. And we're really working also with economists, with people who've been into alternative currencies, but also with anthropologists and sociologists. But the thing is also, it can become very complex, but you can always bring it down to what is actually automatable. And what is automatable is this flow of energy and financial transactions that you can capture with the data. And that data today we know we can use to actually, first of all, learn how the system is increasing and becoming more productive, but also use the data to actually also let the algorithm control the token supply according to the needs of the villages. And to the needs mean what you can capture in data is one thing, but what you have to also take into account is the culture of these villages. And that's a huge question, how do we do that? Because as far as I know, there are only very few ideas about how to capture social interactions by feedback from people. So these are huge questions.
So I think we could go on indefinitely just about the token design of these potential token that you want to create for the solar containers. Rumman, maybe to your use cases you briefly outlined in your talk. One was around supply chain transparency. Could you add to Tom's example with another example, and or also the identity example?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit more about ID 2020, because it's something that Accenture and Microsoft we're very, very proud of. So with a lot of refugees and people leaving crisis situations, not only do you, you know, the few papers you are able to carry with yourself are not really often verifiable. There's massive amounts of fraud, but often most people literally just lose these papers they have. They have no physical evidence that they even exist. So imagine trying to get services, trying to establish yourself in a new country. Let's say you are offered asylum in Vienna. How do you prove that you once were a doctor in Syria, or that you are able to make shoes or farm, or that you have some sort of skill that you're able to contribute to the society, or that you even are educated, or who you are, that you even had a life or an existence before? It's not only a very human need to feel like we have existed, that we've had some impact on the world, but it's also like literally an administrative need, right? So this sort of fulfills both. The other thing about refugee populations is by tying these biometrics to their identification and not having it be paperwork based, refugee populations move a lot from place to place. So I actually had visited the Bekaa Valley and Lebanon last year to see some of the World Food Program sites, and there's a lot of issues with fraud, even when you create debit card based systems. And of course, like, we cannot talk about some societies without talking about the ingrained inequalities. Right? Some of these are societies or families in which women are not treated as equal as men. But what we learned from the microfinance world, whether you're talking about FINRA or Grameen Bank, is that actually the female head of the household is more likely to use funds appropriately than the male head of the household. This is, this is just how we have seen these things.
My wife tells me, yes.
And particularly in FINRA in South America, that's what they found, is that by giving the funding to the women, it was more likely to go towards children, towards food, towards the home, rather than towards other things. So how do we then link it to the appropriate people, make sure there isn't fraud, but also make sure that the people that it's linked to are safe? We cannot physically hand people money. Some of these can be very dangerous environments. So thinking about the safety and security, the pre-existing inequality, and making sure that there's the appropriate distribution of goods and services, and then finally just the freedom of these individuals to make choices and move. So if these individuals are moved to another location, how do we then transfer their, whether it's the goods that they've purchased or the money that they have or the skills they've acquired? There's actually a startup through Catapult. It's actually how Shermin and I know each other, through Catapult Accelerator, which is an impact tech group out of Norway. And what they actually do is create a blockchain-driven economy for refugees. So when people provide services to each other, someone teaches someone's children in exchange for some, let's say food, cooking services, or some sort of education. This actually gets tracked in the ledger, and that sort of helps them build their individual resume, so that when they move to another country or are repatriated, they're able to say, I actually have developed a skill. I have used this skill in these particular situations. So thinking of value creation and creating this economy that's based on not just having a physical intermediary, but actually just pure exchange and via tokens. That's a great use case within the refugee population.
Thank you, Rumman. Jeffrey, you have something to remark to.
I mean, I think these are great examples, both the refugee one and your one in Africa, of showing, in fact, the potential of these new technologies to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes? That's a big, big objective, and up to now we've always failed to achieve those goals. So maybe we have to ask ourselves, in fact, can we harness technology to do that? But let's come back, in fact, to what's the main interest of this audience? You're businessmen, so you should be asking yourself, well, what will blockchain do for me? Yeah. First question: can you all put your hands up? How far would you feel comfortable coming up on the stage and explaining what blockchain is? Put your hands up.
It's like 10 people.
10. That's pretty good, yeah?
That's actually pretty good.
I actually had the first meeting we had in Vienna, in fact, on our tax group, yeah? And we had commissioners of tax people, there's 70 people, and I asked the same question. One hand went up, and he even said, maybe, maybe. At the end of the morning, we had 5 hands up. The last meeting we had 15. Yeah? So we're making some progress. And the funny thing is, blockchain is not that complicated. Yeah? Yeah? Let me give you an example, though, how for you in business, how it can help. Think of the environment we live in today. We have a trade war between the US and China. That's going to affect us all. Yeah? So anything that we can do to facilitate trade is a good thing. Yeah? And that's where blockchain kicks in. Yeah? Because there's a super, I know we disagree on this, yeah? So we have an argument, yeah? There's a super experiment that the World Customs Organization has been putting in place with Korea, the Netherlands, and Kenya on the way that blockchain can facilitate global value chains. Yes? Basically, cutting out a lot of the paperwork, yeah? Maersk, it's reduced their compliance cost by 40%, yeah? Okay, they had a little hiccup when the whole system went down for 2 days, and the guy almost lost his job that was in charge of the purpose. But it does show the potential, in fact, of these technologies to make a very practical impact on you. Yeah? And it's the same for large companies. Siemens, you actually have a blockchain in your tax department. Yeah? And when I talked to the vice president of Siemens, he said, it's a great initiative. Yeah? The only problem is I'm going to have to sack 40% of my people. Yeah?
I have one question.
Oh, dear.
How did that blockchain actually go offline for 2 days? Because the Bitcoin blockchain didn't do that for the last night.
Yeah, I'm not a technologist, yeah, so I only, I can't answer this. But all I know is the vice president of Maersk said the whole systems went down for 2 days.
All right. That's for blockchain. Now, our topic here is the intersection of the technology, the convergence of the technologies, blockchain, AI, and IoT. Can you focus on a use case that's especially in your day-to-day business as a tax expert, international tax expert? What are the most pressing questions around taxation of a certain use case in the international environment? And maybe you can explain the use case before going on the legal aspects.
If you look at our tax systems, they're basically still based on 19th century concepts. Yeah? Yeah? They're very inefficient. They have a high compliance cost for business. They have a high administrative cost for government. Yeah. And again, actually, as you said, not block. It's the whole combination of new technologies, blockchains, AI, robotics. What those technologies can do is completely transform the way our tax systems work. Yeah. What does that mean? I mean, look at typically what happens with the corporate income tax. Yes. You earn your profits today. Next year, you may report them. The third year, you put your tax return in, and maybe in 5 years, you've actually agreed on how much tax you're going to pay. Yeah? So 5-year gap between earning the profits, paying the tax. Yeah? That can all change. You can actually bring the corporate tax into real time. Yeah? And what does that mean? And this is frightening. Yeah? It means basically that governments will have access into the accounts of companies. Yeah? And the transactional information will flow every day back from the company to the government. Yeah? So no more tax returns, no more tax audits, no more game playing, yeah? And an integrated approach to dealing with your VAT and your corporate income tax. Yeah? An enormous saving in resources, yes? Increased in transparency, yeah? Another good example, Africa, yeah? What's one of the biggest problems in Africa for business operating in Africa? It's corruption, yeah? Corruption, yeah? Well, their blockchain has a role because what do you mean? What do corrupt African officials do, politicians? They put their money in BVI, in Panama, etc. Yeah, yeah. But if you actually have a blockchain register of all assets, a global register that is open, that is transparent, that is easy to understand, and that is maintained up to date, it's much more difficult. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So another good example in the sense of how with these technologies you can actually push through changes that would benefit humanity more generally. What's the problem? We've just gone past Thanksgiving, so I'll use the analogy. It is a little bit like asking the turkey to come to Thanksgiving, yeah?
Yes, I think that's a very, very good example. So what you're saying, the first example you brought is that, and I'll rephrase it in my own words, once we have the accounting standards tied to the blockchain, we can have accounting, controlling, and tax payment on the fly at less reduction, way less costs, higher times or throughput times, and less fraud. That's amazing. But privacy and transparency are trade-offs. And this is also what you were addressing. In that context, maybe I would like to cycle back to Tom. Because you're creating physical identity, which means that you're cryptographic computers, right? So we were talking, you, Rumman, addressed GDPR and to the right to be forgotten. Now, my personal opinion is that the right to be forgotten is absurd in a data-driven world. That's my personal opinion. I think what we need is strong use of privacy-protecting cryptography. And I'm not sure if you have the same opinion, but maybe you can explore a little bit on the trade-off of privacy, transparency, and the role of cryptography in that, because cryptography is the building block of these distributed ledgers and blockchains.
Naturally, so it's a problem we face every day, yes, doing the business. So, for example, we were very early on approached by several parties to tag humans, right? And I mean, there are so many benefits. Yes, in Scandinavia, it's really a trend, and at the end of the day, we made it a company policy not to tag humans, right? So I still have to fight in-house about this, but it's really important that we say, okay, as long as we are not really sure where all this technology is leading us as a society, yes, don't tag humans. Rule number 1. Second rule, so if you use this and you use AI and so on, and you get into a situation where you have to make a decision about an algorithm. So the decision could be done by the human or it could be done by the algorithm. Yes, main rule, yeah, the last word is never with the algorithm. Yes, so these technologies are so strong that we have to be ultra careful. And we have to be ultra careful because right now, we are enabling more machines than humans. Yes, and this is a problem I saw nowhere addressed nor solved. Yes, so even what you described is it's fantastic for machine economy, yes, direct economy, direct taxation, and so on. But you taxate the productivity of machines. So we have to get this back into enabling humans and local economies.
I think that's why what you were saying about the philosophy and the ethical issues are so important. And unfortunately, politicians don't buy that, yeah? And we need to have that debate quickly, because otherwise we're going to get into, I think, a very difficult position. Yeah?
So actually, two thoughts on one thing you mentioned. So you were talking about the concept of tagging humans, and you brought up, very rightfully so, that in Scandinavia, that was the first place I saw it as well. I go to Norway a lot, and in Norway and Sweden, etc., people have, they call it it was the first step in transhumanism, the combination of human and machine, and they have microchipping parties where they put little RFID chips in their palms, and they're able to open doors and pay for their Metro cards. And I have not met a single person who has an issue with that there. I have not met a single person outside of Scandinavia that would happily do that. But that's a really good example of the concept of differing norms, and it has to do with the relationship of people in government. They implicitly trust that their government will do the right thing. They also have a more transparent system than all of us do. And just as an example, anybody can know anybody else's salary. So you can actually ping anyone's tax information in all of, let's say, Norway, right? But that individual whose information that you're looking up will get notification that person X is looking at your information. Fully transparent system in that sense. And there's a sense of accountability in that the other person knows that you're looking at them. So because they have this trust in government, and again, this is why I emphasize trust so much, they're more willing to do things like have microchipped enabled doors and transit systems. So on the second thought of sort of what was the second thought, the issue that you brought up earlier? Oh, the human-centric. Yeah, so to further complicate that discussion, so again, this is artificial intelligence world has been having these discussions for almost about 2 years and in a very applied manner. And here's what we are actually finding in some of the first wave of this sort of human-centric AI. The entire purpose of building the AI, well, one of the purposes was to give this sort of this objectivity or, sort of unbiased, I use that in quotes, view, right? and all the issues with bias and data and models aside, yes, machines are able to find patterns and mass amounts of information that people couldn't, et cetera. And I'll give an example from the use of artificial intelligence to help judges determine whether or not prisoners should get bail. So initially they were built very algorithmic heavy. So many local groups protested against that, saying that the judge should actually have the final say. It should be a human-centric, informed opinion by the judge. But actually now looking at systems over time, there's a really great report by this group called Upturn, and I watched a presentation by David Robinson from Upturn. What they're actually finding over time is that judges regress back to their biased mean. So in other words, they originally biased, there was this AI, and initially they're sort of more adhering to the AI, and then actually over time, they're regressing back to their bias and they're ignoring the AI input. So the question we're now struggling with, and what we fear, is that we will have fairness washing. So we'll build these systems, and we're going to say it's objective, but the human should make the final decision. But then we're recreating the very problem, but hiding it under another layer of the seeming objectivity. So and so the reason I didn't bring up human centricity, et cetera, and I touched on it briefly, is that is actually a space we're currently struggling with, because it's a very, very new concept to us in the AI and ethics space. Is we were very, now it actually kind of seems naive. Well, yeah, of course, because the reason we built the AI was because people were biased in the first place, and then we're going to say we want them making the decisions, but then they're just going to go back to making their biased decisions. So one way around that, by the way, is people are talking about this concept of moral math. So if you want to override the AI system, you have to provide reasoning for why you will do so. But then, of course, what we want to avoid is adding more layers of bureaucracy. But then, okay, you do your moral math, and who decides whether or not that was appropriate decisioning to override or not override? So these are the kinds of chicken and egg problems we often fall into.
And I think it raises an interest in legal issues, because what's the legal status of a judgment that's made by a machine? Yeah, I mean, there's a case that's just come across in the UK courts of where they automated all the audit selection. Yeah. So you get and then a taxpayer came along and said, well, that's not a person. Yeah.
Right.
So that's why we need to look very carefully at, are our legal rules written in such a way that they work in a digital world? And I think the short answer is they don't.
Right.
So we need not just to change the rules, we need to change the way we actually draw them up. Yep. And it's no longer going to be enough to have a lawyer sitting in a black bag office drawing the rules up. They're going to have to talk to people like you as well.
In the US, the group AI Now published a really great review of all the successful litigation around AI, and it's always been around due process. Due process meaning that you have a right to understand the system and the human being behind it, and due process has to do with human beings, not algorithms.
Basically, so we need more philosophers to come into this field.
I would like to, coming from me, I have to laugh. I would like to take it back to a more tangible level, less philosophical level.
I want to help you.
Yes, thank you. I'm afraid we might be losing some people who are not so deep into the topic yet. Hands-on use case. What are your legal challenges today with hands-on use cases, blockchain, AI, IoT?
Yeah. So before we go to the challenges, let me just drop this, because it's actually, I feel that electricity is actually a good application domain to start with IoT and the convergence of it with AI and blockchain, because the system is man-made, engineered, it's not statistical, it has very little to do with philosophy, but with physical laws. So we have a lot of a priori knowledge that we can feed into the algorithms. And now all of the electrical system, actually down to the smart meter in your homes, hopefully soon, is actually going to be enabled by small brains, like Riddle and Code is doing. And we can even embed them into any electrical appliance that is going to be sold. Now, with these connections, with these computing nodes available, and with the data that we have from the systems and the algorithms that can learn from the data, we can actually embed adaptive models for learning energy efficiency into anything that actually uses electricity. And that would be something, first of all, a safe or sort of safe application of these technologies where we really can have a more efficient, more adaptive system that is based on renewables. However, even with that very fond and actually doable, I wouldn't even call it vision, it's really doable, we do have legal issues. For example, today, me as a homeowner, I have an energy monitoring device that I get off the internet. It just captures the electrical data in my home, and if I have a solar rooftop, a battery, maybe an EV electrical vehicle, charging spot, I can download an app that can learn how my home is actually operating and how I like it to be 21 degrees in the rooms and so on and so forth. And actually that app cannot just optimize my home now, that would be legal, but it can also use smart contracts that I mentioned, not just for changing electricity suppliers, but also for selling the excess capacity of my home, be it excess electricity or excess storage capacity that I just don't use in this 15 minutes. The app or the algorithms that learned that can actually initiate, trigger these smart contracts, smart oracles from the outside, and can actually help people who have these apps and live nearby to balance not just their electrical input-output, but also their digital wallets, meaning they can actually earn passive income from the investments that they made and not use fully. And that's great, that passive income comes from unused electricity, from energy efficiency potentials that we have, and also from the data that these algorithms are actually turning into value for this area, for the grid operator in that area, and so on and so forth. However, that would mean the entire energy legal aspects are new on the table. Because today, that app, if I download it, either I as the user or the app or the developer of the app needs to register as an electricity supplier and needs to have a proper organization and all of the tax issues and so on and so forth that come with it. Okay. So we have no current solution to that.
It's a sort of a contradiction, you know, because a lot of the blockchain started as a libertarian thing, yeah? You know, I always like to describe, you know, the American, you know, big tech companies. I have 4 kids, yeah? And when they were teenagers, they were horrible, yeah? And that's what these big companies are. You know, they're impatient with government. They're impatient with taxes. They just see governments getting in the way. And now things are beginning to change. They're beginning to recognize, actually, it is only government that can provide the regulatory framework for us to succeed, yeah?
That is literally the map that I had drawn out on my slide, right? Where it starts off from this naivete to the tech solutionism, right? All the way to the denial, to the acceptance. And honestly, what do we have to? We don't have to recreate what it means to be fair. We have actually legislated on that, so let's draw from it. It may need improvement, but at least it is a starting point.
The question, and I guess the time lag that you're referring to, is we have experience, governance experience, that we can translate to a new technology, but we first need to understand how to translate this. And during that time gap, we have lack of regulation, which also means a lot of, how do you say, Unsicherheiten? Uncertainties for the entrepreneurs. Maybe, Tom, I would like to ask you about the many, which regulatory challenges or legal challenges do you face or do you think are the most challenging for you at this stage of your company?
So I think the biggest obstacle is understanding, true understanding, right? So whatever we do, we have to explain and explain. So we go into meetings and we waste 1 hour on explaining, and then we have 5 minutes to talk about the product. Or really with every project we did, at the end of the project, even if it was super successful, yes, there was the question, but we could also do this with a non-blockchain database, right? So it's really difficult to describe this. So it's education, yes, and I also wanted to add, people ask me all the time, why blockchain? Yes, and after this 1.5 years out in the field doing real business, I can tell you we need blockchain specifically for one or two reasons. So one strong trend is digitization. Yes, you have to digitize your company. Yes, in former times you had to automate it, now you have to digitize it. The second is, whatever you do, even as a local Austrian company, you compete globally, whether you like it or not. So even if you produce food, yes, Amazon is going to bring the food into your village cheaper, maybe better, more efficient, and so on. So you compete with everything you do globally. So everything happens online, and online has maybe only 4 portals how you go online to do business. Yes, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, something like this. So, and if we want to keep the playing field on the same level, and if we want to give a local, small country economies a real chance on the global market, we need this access to be non-aggregated, centralized. Yes, and blockchain technology is giving this opportunity to you. For example, if you use these tags and you tag your products and you tell the provenance, you tell the history of your products, that you produce them in an ecological environment, sound production, no child labor, and so on, you elevate your products to a new level, and you give trust, and you have better chance in the global economy.
Just 2 comments. I mean, I think the choice for companies is you can either be the disruptor or the disruptive. Yeah. Yeah. And if you're not active, you're out of business very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I would like to conclude my set of questions and open to potential audience questions. So I don't know if we have a mic going around somewhere. Organizers, yes. Is anyone in the audience, do you have questions around use cases? Yes, back there. Or comments also. This can be an interactive session.
Hi. I have a question to Ms. Rusitschka. You said you built your company in a decentralized way. Could you perhaps elaborate on that? Thank you.
Okay, so good question. I've been thinking about that for 2 years. When I left Siemens, the one last presentation I made was about ICOs and that there's something coming, and this token has a mechanism for incentivizing, and it really gets at the discussion about, firms are built to reduce transactions costs that we would have, that would rise the prices of whatever we want to immeasurable. Now we have the internet that can connect any 2 people on Earth. And now we also have this blockchain and smart contracts. Through tokenization, we can actually transfer value across any 2 points on Earth. And the way especially after I left Siemens, the way I worked with the people in the blockchain ecosystem is really totally online, right? So actually, also the things that we're building is we're building on open source. We're building on algorithms that other people build and are training them. We're building on frameworks that are open source. On the AI side, on the machine learning side, the blockchain ecosystem is fully open source, and now with tokenization, we have also the possibility to actually coordinate this type of resource allocation where you would normally need a firm. Now, the one big question I had the past 2 years is actually moving towards this app that can learn from data and learn from the data how to operate a power grid. That was still the vision, but how we can get there is actually really we have to start from zero, because that's something, the big elephant in the room that no one talks about. No one's organization here actually has a proper data pipeline or a data strategy, right? So when I went out there, I was very, blue-eyed. But now I realize that actually what Twilio can offer is the data curation. We have a good data science network that we can bring into the mix. I have built good connections to the really innovators out there developing energy monitoring devices who are at the data capturing side. That's, I believe, is where we have to start, and for that I don't actually need a firm at all. What I need is actually bring everyone onto the table, onto a platform where we incentivize the data device vendors, where we incentivize the users to provide their data, where we incentivize the data scientists to actually build and apply their models on the data. Actually, just providing good data as incentivization enough for data scientists. And then also really the knowledge, bring in the knowledge of how you can actually build products based on this model. And now I have a system, a network of value adds where I can just create a token that makes them work and at the end capture from energy data through the whole pipeline and at the end develop an app that is cutting edge. And for that, I don't need to hire people, and I don't need to have them on a payroll.
Okay. Do they pay taxes?
That's the problem.
Yes.
So the problem is always what I see. It's everything is possible now, but if I have to do it in a legal manner, I get trouble.
And this is the one thing about tax people. When they don't understand things, they get aggressive. Yeah, they get aggressive. You have a problem. Yeah. Honestly, and that's why we need to have this debate. Yeah, you know, it's a boring debate of what should be the tax streams of tokens. There's no consensus.
Exactly.
I have a question again, but why? I mean, it should be taxed in a similar manner as if I have a blog online today and I earn Google Ads income. That's how token income should be taxed.
I agree,
is that doable?
But that's not the way it works.
But why isn't that the way? Why do we have to do for every digital app a different taxation model? Why
Most tax policy makers are sort of average age of 85, yeah? So they're a little bit reluctant to change their habits. I mean, you know, I think we need a cultural change. We need the millenniums to come on board, get more engaged in the tax world, and actually see more of the opportunities that
the question is whether if we have that time. And I think, Sebnem, if you remember the hearings of Facebook hearings, Senate hearings, the questions that were asked, those people were not 85, but they didn't even know what the business model of Facebook were, some of them. But, so you know, I think, yep.
Sorry, that raises me, because looking at Austria, yeah, I mean, you're a small economy, you're a very open economy, you're an economy that's dominated by SMEs, yes? So you have all the characteristics that you need, in fact, to succeed in the new world, yeah? I think what the government needs to do here is to set out a very clear digital society strategy, yeah? Yeah, what do we want to be? Where do we want to be? How, and then that translates into what's the role of government, yeah? And again, if you want to look at a role model, Estonia, yeah? They're there, they've got it, yeah? They basically said, we want a digital society. To achieve that, we need a digital government. And then, once you've got those two things in place, then you can get down. What do you do on the environment side? What do you do on the tax side? Because all of the issues that you need to resolve cut across these things, like having a unique digital identifier, like dealing with the confidentiality issues.
Also another... Sorry, I was going to say, I'll throw another concept into the mix. So one of the talks that I give at regulatory bodies, whether it's the US government, UK government, OECD, is this concept of agile governance. So adopting the concept of agile methodologies from the engineering world. So we will just have to understand that regulation needs to move at the pace of innovation. It is traditionally something that lags behind. And that's actually... Some would say that it's actually by design that it lags behind because it is meant to create immutable institutional structures. I think we actually need to challenge that notion and have regulation be more mutable and more agile, which means developing in time-box iterations, which means like thinking back and doing postmortems, which means engaging with startups and innovators in order to create said regulation instead of making it this top-down methodology of we have said so and this is why and this is it, to actually embrace the fact that things will constantly be changing. You will be introduced to new paradigms. I think that's a very scary space for regulators to navigate.
Plus, you have to deal the hesitancy of the professions, you know, whether the doctors, the lawyers, the tax specialists, the auditors, to change their business model, yeah? Because, I mean, basically what a lot of this technology is doing, it's threatening them, yeah? And that's why I think the fourth industrial revolution is not the same as the first and the second and the third, yeah? Because the people that have been affected are people like in this room, yeah? Professions, yeah? Again, Siemens, 40% of your tax department is going to be, say, Nestle, 50%, yeah? Yeah, look at the way that some of these technologies can be used, in fact, in the professions. Yep. Yeah.
Let's maybe last follow-up question to what you said. Are you working together with Austrian lawmakers regarding innovation hubs or potential
I think,
solutions?
one of the reasons why I was very pleased, you know, being involved in the creation of the Kryptoökonomie Institute, yeah, was it brought together all of the communities that we need to have in the room together, because it's the economists. I mean, I know people don't like economists, but, you know, and they have two arms, yes, but you need the economists there, you need the accountants there, you need the business process people there, you need the IT people there, you need the lawyers there, you need the tax people, and all of these people are together, yeah? And because when you bring that community together, then you begin to say, we can get a whole solution, yeah?
Yes, but it's taking time, as we can see at our institute.
It is taking time, but I mean, that's like any revolution. It starts slowly, and then I actually think the next 3 years are going to be pretty crucial, because I think we'll see an acceleration of what's happening, yeah? And the way that will happen, I think, is that there will be governments that will say, we're going to do it, yeah? Okay. And once you get 3 or 4 success cases, other governments will say, the US, forget it, yeah? There's too many legacy issues there, there's too many political issues there. It's small countries that will lead, and that's a message for Austria. You have the capacity to lead if you want, yeah? Because they're agile.
So maybe asking the audience, is there any comment, question over there? I can see a hand. Yeah. Another one here. Up, yeah, but then, okay. Let's not forget, yeah, over there.
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit complex, because we are talking about the front end of how to adapt the blockchain to the business ecosystem, and we speak about the blockchain ecosystem. And I started with a group of students 2 years ago to discuss the problem of investment process using blockchain technology to control the investment process. And over the time we learned that to achieve a result of our project, we need a team of people from different areas, interdisciplinary. And then the second lesson was that we have learned that to adapt the blockchain, which we believe that is the right one, to the existing business ecosystem is not always easy, because then you have to change this business ecosystem. And that was the same in the automation 50 years ago, when we have developed, you know, exactly in Siemens. I work in Siemens in this area. We have to adapt to the mathematical model of the business ecosystem. And in our project, there was very interesting experience, because we had this project society which was responsible for managing the total project. And we transferred this classical model to the blockchain model. And we learned something which was unusual, because this project society, which was managed, was immediately moved from the center of the project to the periphery, using exactly the same position as any other player in the system.
And that must be terrifying to the
system. Yeah. And so, once again, I think so. The very important is to understand the business ecosystem where the blockchain will be adapted, and maybe it is much more easy to start it from zero for the investments or for the project which are in the start position, rather to implement a system in a system which already exists. Yep. And the biggest problem is the law. When you say that the problem, for instance, with electricity company, because electricity company operating 100 years under the same law.
Yes.
And now you are coming and asking the question, is code the law? Is code the law?
The other question is who makes law? Actually, we need to go back to also innovating law and saying it's not God-given, it's actually made by the people for the people. That's one part, but what you said is actually true. If, for example, Tom, you must have seen it in your projects as well. Once the realization comes, oh, I own a business. If I do it in a blockchain-based system, then I become part of a network, but I don't own the network. And that's terrifying to people who are used to own and build moats around their businesses and so on and so forth. So that's why you're right. That's why the most feasible first product I do believe we can build for Africa, for African villages, rather than for villages here in Austria or Germany. However, at the same time, because this token actually enables us to rewire these systems and incentivize the stakeholders, I do believe that we can create systems inside the systems that electricity and electrical nodes do not have to operate. Yeah, I don't have to sell kilowatt hours. The moment I don't sell kilowatt hours, I don't compete with any electricity stakeholder. I can monetize these assets in a different sector. And if you don't see that, that's
I think
the real problem.
Well, I think it's easier maybe for us to see that, because we've been thinking blockchain for a few years now, all of us who are on stage. It might be a bit more difficult for somebody who's quite new to understand the real potential. And I think what we probably need is more use cases, tangible use cases, so that everyone has more capabilities, or it's easier for regular people who are not around that technology to understand the impact of tokenization. We had another question over there.
Yeah,
or comment, yes?
You all have varying experiences on the board with different blockchain in different parts of the world. My question comes back to Jeffrey was saying that Estonia he sees as the most advanced, if I understood correctly. Do you see any other countries that are coming along well in terms of blockchain, in terms of governance? And if you do have a specific example, a use case, that would be fantastic.
Finland actually would be mine. Finland is making strides, not just actually in the use of artificial intelligence in government, having it be blockchain based. They're currently working on multiple projects to create not just e-government that's sort of responsive to an individual's needs, but actually predictive e-government. So let's say you move to a new place, it would make sort of predictions and recommendations on services you might need. So for example, it would know you have a child and your child is hitting 5 and should probably be going to kindergarten, but maybe knows certain things about your child's medical history to say here might be the best or most appropriate kindergartens for your child to go to. That's so moving into the predictive modeling world. But then this is where the ethical considerations come in. So what level of invasiveness does the government have, and to what extent are these predictions, accurate versus sort of pushing you to have particular behaviors. So let's say, you graduate college and you have some particular degree. Theoretically, this system would say, here are the lines of business you should go into. But to what extent are we sort of molding people in a particular way algorithmically versus allowing them to have free will? The good thing is the Finnish government, they actually are thinking about these considerations. So Finland has taken a lead, not just in e-government, blockchain-based, AI-based, but also actually in the ethics space. So the Finnish government is actually an active contributor to groups that are built around algorithmic auditing and things like that. So I would certainly keep an eye on Finland right now.
Tom, you have one?
You can contrast that with China, yeah? Because China's coming very fast on the AI, but on the ethical debates, I think it's a different ballgame. The other country, as I said, to watch is Estonia, yeah? Very, very fast. And another one, which is a rather sort of exceptional example, is Rwanda, yeah? Because they have a president who is, shall we say, has a lot of power, yeah? And, he wants to actually, push Rwanda towards a digital society. And because they don't have democracy, he can actually do that, yeah? And, that raises some interesting issues. And then maybe the example we were talking about before, India.
India.
Yeah? Where, Modi, his vision is to make, he calls it the digital India, yeah? And he had the demonetization, he had the introduction of the global service tax, a whole range of things. And it's going to be interesting to see how that works out over the next few years.
Tom, yeah.
I think we don't have to look that far. Yes, so for me it's really Germany, Switzerland and Austria. So in Austria, yes, we got an institute for Kryptoökonomie. We have two of the world leading places for cryptography at universities in Graz and Innsbruck. We have NXP at Gradcorn in Styria, which is producing the most sophisticated crypto chips. Berlin is the hub of blockchain innovation. Yes, practically all the foundations are there, and blockchain technology is developed.
They're formally in Zug, but the teams are in Berlin.
There is the legal stuff, right? And Switzerland has to adopt
have lovely cows in Zug as well, yeah?
Yes.
They have shell offices that they visit, some of them.
Yes.
Minimum amount of time.
And Switzerland has to be super open because, it's their core business, right? So if the Swiss banking industry is disrupted by these new technologies, the whole country would go havoc. Yes, so in Austria it's really interesting because FMR is not stopping the ambitions. They are talking about sandboxing. Yes, there are people you can address which help you to do really, really outstanding projects. National Bank, it's interested into this, right? Politicians talking about that. The city of Vienna, doing a lot of projects, yes, very far ahead concerning everything, digital citizen cards, additional services, and so on. So it's a fantastic place to run companies like this.
I do have to agree, and maybe my personal history shows that I used to live full-time in Berlin for many years and was very happy. And even though I was born here, I wanted to stay in Berlin, but Austrian legislation made this institute possible, and this is why I'm back in Vienna. I'm very grateful to be back because Austria is being very innovative in that field on a, as you said, national, but also on a Viennese local level. So,
but I think that the difficulty here, you have a good story to tell, and you're not telling it well.
That's something different.
To be honest.
Can you tell the story for us? How would you tell the story?
I can make up a bedtime story that you can use.
So I do want to bring something. I feel like the regulatory space and the legal space is getting a bit of beaten up a little bit right now. But I do want to point out that we're all kind of assuming people just want to make companies and everybody just wants to create a happy world. And I'm going to be honest, this is where AI started. We started with that level of naivete. Right? And that is the wrong place to start from because there are bad actors, there are people who want to cheat, there are people who want to sell your information, right, and target you with ads that will polarize you politically, right, ideologically. So this is actually why regulation exists. It's to protect us because let's be real, if we did adopt this pure libertarian, free-for-all environment, it would not be a pretty place. This is actually not the world we want to live in. So I do want to give regulators, and because in my world, we have come full circle back to regulation and government. And why? Because they're the only places where we can actually, at scale, address and redress problems, because problems will arise. We cannot be so naive to think that everyone's going to always be the good guy. And frankly, that comes from our place of privilege, where we are around people who are wealthy enough to not worry about their money, and sort of sheltered enough to not have actually had things stolen from us. These are very, very real problems. And before we take this and start moving it into cultures, communities, and societies in which that is not the norm, this is actually why we need good regulation. So it's not like, I just want to shy us away a little bit from that, like, the law is getting in my way narrative, to say, but not to say that law doesn't need reformation. It certainly does, but it is an enabler, which is why I talk about good governance is about creative dissent, right? Good governance is about allowing privacy. And actually, what we find in some of the biggest companies in the world that want to adopt artificial intelligence, it's because we don't have regulation that they hold themselves back, right? Because when you have a fenced-in area that is safe to play in, right, that is when you innovate safely. Why was Amazon able to actually innovate in this environment, even though it ended up in a failed product? Because they had built fences around it. So I just want to emphasize that properly done governance is actually a critical component to achieving all of these gains that we're talking about
We're
today.
at the very
it's not
similar
just good governance,
point.
it's good global governance.
Yes.
Because, I mean, by definition, the technologies that we're talking about, they don't know borders, yes? So you really need governments to get together, yeah? And I don't think you're going to get leadership from the US on this, yeah? I think Europe can play a key role, yeah? And saying these are the rules of the game that we would like, and then encourage other countries, in fact, to come on.
Well, there is a bit of a power vacuum in the U.S. right now. So what we're seeing is, right, so New York City passing an algorithmic accountability law. We have the state of California passing privacy laws. So what we're seeing is, because we have many tiers of government, smart state and local actors are seeing that policy vacuum and really taking a leap in that space.
I would like to give the voice back to the audience. Yeah.
Hi, it's me again. I would like to ask Rumman if you would like to share your views on the social credit system that will probably be implemented in China. And the question is, or the reason why I'm asking is, although our reaction most of the time is, oh my God, this is going to be a super dystopian, super surveillance system, it does show that one aspect of AI and this technology is that it can incentivize us to be better citizens, and whether you would like to share your views on that.
That's an excellent question, yeah, and thank you so much for asking it. So to explain what the social credit score is for people who may be unfamiliar, in China, I think by 2020, the entire population will be subject to basically a numerical rating. And this rating is an algorithm that's a function of things like your purchase behavior, your level of education, and even things like whether or not you've committed crime. So, I can spend an hour talking about this, but I'll sum it up in as short of a way as possible. So the way you phrase it, that AI can incentivize us to be better citizens. So there is a concept, and actually we were talking about this earlier. I'm currently writing a piece for the UN about our misunderstanding of the potential of artificial intelligence to create this sort of more behaved state, right? So who doesn't like the idea that, if you've committed a crime, then, you're not going to be allowed to have certain things, or if something bad happens, like your car is stolen, or your child is kidnapped, that there's a system that would be able to track it immediately, right? But there's a very slippery slope from when we move from a free will society to a surveillance state. And why are we so scared of surveillance states, right? So there is this concept within law called the rule of law. This is why culture and norms are so important. It is not enough that we adhere to the law because we are scared of being punished. That is actually the wrong society to live in, because that is not a society that has creative dissent. Because number one, just because something is a law doesn't mean it is good. And number two, just because something is illegal doesn't mean it is wrong. right? And that is a fundamental fact, right? Laws are, as Sebnem said, created by humans. They are not given by God or whatever higher being you may agree with, right? So it is a very human and possibly flawed system that is enforcing this. So what is the rule of law? So the rule of law is this concept of adhering to this social contract, this agreement of this is what leads to the fabric of society working well, right? So you think about little things like when you get off the U-Bahn and you're going on the escalator, if you are walking, you walk on the left, and if you are standing, you stand on the right, right? No one's going to give you a ticket if you don't do that. Sure, somebody might say something to you, right? That is the worst that'll happen to you. But why do we all do that? We all do that because it creates a better functioning society. How we arrived at that, no one knows. It is not codified in law. You're not required to do it. But we all agree it helps us have a more functioning society. And that's actually the kind of world we want to live in. Not a world in which every action, behavior, movement is monitored, scored, and judged, right? So there's this really wonderful article by this woman, Anne-Marie Slaughter, and it is about our relationship with society and privacy and government. And what she says, pretty much in short, is that if we move to an overly surveilled state, then we risk moving from being innocent until proven guilty to being unconvicted persons. So we will live in a constant state of fear that every single movement, however innocent, is somehow breaking some law. And that will lead to a society that completely lacks creativity, imagination, and innovation.
And I think that's a very good question. Thank you for that, and thank you for leaning in. And I would like to address the question to you two, how blockchain can create this dystopia, or whether and how blockchain could create a dystopian control machine. And what can it, and if yes, what do we need to, like really tangible, like not, what do we need to mind so that doesn't happen?
Mm-hmm. So the one thing is, as I said, we now can create, we can program incentives. We can have programmable money, and that makes people do things. So programming incentives is now the superpower, but on the decision of what incentives to choose, we are really on a very low level. I know we have a lot of answers to what are the right incentives, etc., but also they have to be programmable. Otherwise, we can't incorporate them into the system.
So now, what do we need to do?
Exactly.
So dystopia doesn't happen. The dystopia that she painted and that AI enables. And what is the threat of blockchain? Maybe Tom, like
I was very much afraid, yes, especially with these chips and the idea that we have chips every square meter in the city. But now, the last 3 months, we had to do a lot of projects where we had to face GDPR and the results of GDPR. So we had to completely change the data we were starting to store. And I have to tell you that GDPR is fantastic because it really protects us and it makes this kind of dystopian thing impossible. So I think again, Europe is on the right track.
I wouldn't say impossible. I agree. Well. And that's the thing. People were complaining a lot about GDPR. And it's funny, every time we do these events, somebody profusely apologizes because I have to sign some sort of paper. And I say, no, this is a good thing I have to sign this paper, right? But I don't think it gets rid of it. I don't think it eliminates it. But I agree. It is a step absolutely in the right direction.
So I have the feeling that we're slowly coming to an end, or we might have come to an end. If there is a last question, I would like to take it. Okay, wait, we have 1, 2. Okay, we take you and you. I saw 2 hands, and maybe keep the answers a bit shorter. And I think there is still some drinks outside, and there will be opportunity for one-to-one questions.
Yes, thank you very much. My questions is twofold. So the first one is, what will be the reason for mass adoption for blockchain? And the second question is more pointing to the direction of what will be the next killer app from your perspective, or the next mega trend driving blockchain adoption, IoT, AI. So what are where is it going next, from where it has come from and where it's going in the future, maybe in the next 5 years?
Yep, good question. So what's the next killer app, everyone? Your personal prediction? Tom? maybe start and then we'll
yes,
go
for me it's quite clear. There's something. It's again a very technical term. It's called non-fungible assets. So this means you can turn everything into money, really everything. Yes, so you can turn this bottle into money and then you can sell it online, or you can trade it, or you can trade it fragmented. So I say, okay, I trade 2 units glass bottle. And once we understand which kind of power this gives to us, yes, we will totally redefine what money is and what economy is. And the local economies will be the super winners.
So I can only second that, and the enabler to that for mass adoption must be, first of all, blockchain-based IDs, not just for devices, but also for me and for you. And that requires good key management. Like today, if you lose your private key, whatever was yours is not yours anymore. So that's a bit difficult for mass adoption. I think key management is key.
I don't know much about killer apps, killer whales, but not killer apps. Huh? But I think the key challenge we're facing in much of this area is getting this right balance between your privacy, confidentiality, and openness. And that's going to be a difficult debate that we're going to have.
Mine is maybe more of a wish list than a killer app, but what I would love is, building on what Tom said, not just the ability to monetize physical things, because I can understand how a bottle has monetary value, but we have actively built a GDP that does not value things like childcare or elder care or home or like house care, cooking. So how can we create a way to, and I hate to use the word monetize because it sounds as if we're selling everything, but literally value things that we do not value today, which, by the way, by choice, were specifically created to devalue the work of women. Right, so we actually have a GDP measurement system that actively devalues the work that women traditionally do. How do we actually enable blockchain to create value out of that type of labor?
The good news, there is a company or an initiative in Berlin, it's called the Embrace Token, and they want to bring a value to people who take care of their family members. And every hour of taking care of a family member creates an Embrace Token, so it's very early on.
Don't forget, as soon as you add a value and you monetize, somebody's going to ask you to pay the tax.
Exactly.
To come back to this, but
So very good question. We have a very, very last question over there. There was somebody raising their hand.
It's right there.
Before him.
Thanks for the very last question. Maybe a very basic one, but given the recent limitations of performance and power supply needed to create blockchains, is the blockchain infrastructure ready to go mainstream?
No. Certainly, I mean, as a computer scientist who went into peer-to-peer and read the Bitcoin paper in 2009, I set it aside and said how inelegant this peer-to-peer protocol is. I just didn't realize that they solved a real tough issue. The thing is, all of the other use cases we've talked about doesn't need that type of security that Bitcoin blockchain really needs. It's under constant attack. It has no, it has no other means than really making it almost impossible by making it very difficult through usage of a lot of electricity. But when it comes to it, I also, in my heart in me, there are two hearts. It's like, could it be also a driver for renewable energy? Because through Bitcoin, you actually make from electricity money that you can send over IP to anywhere. And that's something, it could be interesting to see what happens to the security of a Bitcoin blockchain when it's powered by renewable energy that is zero marginal cost.
One of the interesting things that's just beginning to happen, there's a debate going on between central banks and monetary authorities of whether they should be issuing their own cryptocurrencies. Yes? Yeah, fascinating, yeah? To actually say, okay, we can't beat them, let's join them. Yeah? Frightening as well.
Scalability question, maybe Tom? Do you want to scalability and high energy?
I think the scalability question is solved. Right. It's just a matter of time till certain chains will be more successful than others. It's a competition. Yes, it's a market. So the solution which satisfies the request from the market best will win. We have so many algorithms. We have so different technologies. We have proof of work, proof of stake, proof of provenance, proof of a partial power invested, and so on.
Proof of space.
Yes. Yeah, proof of space. Yes, I could go on. So these things are solved. I stay with what I said earlier on. It's our mindset has to change, and it's about education, education, education. These things are not that simple.
And just on, I'm sorry to keep coming in, but that's, you know, one of the things I've been trying to do here in Vienna, in the university, is to get the university to put on multidisciplinary courses. Yes, if you're a financial person, you need to know technology. If you're a tax person, you need to know technology. Yeah, almost you could say we should get to the situation where you can't get a degree unless there's a technology element in it, and that's very difficult because of academic inertia.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And not only academic inertia, it's like I always say, it's 2018, and we're still not teaching all our children at a very young age how to code. Yep. Just the basic principles in a maybe playful way, which means that they have mental barriers when it comes to that profession, but it's the basis of all our
We also don't teach them how to do economy, right?
We also don't teach them how to do economy. So
it should be breastfeeding and coding should go together.
Well, I think on that note, I would like to end it on a laugh, because it's quite a heavy, multifaceted topic. I hope that we were able to give you some insight into A, where the technology is, B, how it intersects with other technologies. I hope for those who are new to the topic, it was not too much gibberish. And you could take a few key takeaways. A few of us are going to be here for a while still. So thank you very much for coming. And I think there will be some closing remarks from Mr. Neuper.
Thank you so much, dear speaker, for these really, really interesting insights and the lively discussion. Please don't run away and stay with us a little bit longer outside for some refreshments, and maybe there is some further questions that are coming up which people didn't dare to ask inside. Before I all release you for the networking, I would like to briefly turn your attention to some of our innovation-related events, highlights in the upcoming year. It will be easy for you to remember the dates because they will all take place on the 27th of the respective month. So the next edition of the HORIZONTE will take place on February 27, 2019, with the focus on open innovation. Think outside the box is the main topic. 1 month later, on March 27 and 28, we are proud to host the MIT Europe conference here in Vienna, where we're going to have some of the smartest heads of the MIT with us. And for sure, blockchain and artificial intelligence will be some of the top topics as well there. And finally, on May 27th, the Applied Artificial Intelligence conference will be as well one of our real highlights. All events will take place here in the Federal Economic Chamber. If you want to have more details on some of the many other innovation-related activities of Wirtschaft Austria is offering not only here, but around the whole world, please visit our website, wko.außenwirtschaft/innovation. Thank you so much for coming. Please stay tuned, and I sincerely hope to welcome you again. Thank you very much.